vous souhaite la bienvenue à cet événement. As you know, this event is being co-organized by Academia 2063, the International Food Policy Research Institute, and AGRA. So we will have speakers from these three organizations, as well as BMZ. That will be followed by key highlights from the reports from two of the editors, and then we're going to move to a set of moderated discussions.
Let me start by welcoming everybody to the launch event of the 8th edition of the Africa Agriculture Trade Monitor. Extent of imports coming into Africa, which is happening at the same time when exports are also growing, when agriculture in Africa is growing at the fastest pace. So what it probably should tell you is that the import is not driven by lower agricultural performance, is not driven by a stagnating agricultural sector, but is driven by something outside of agriculture, which is economic growth and population growth. The two combined can give you easily a double-digit rate of growth of demand. And that excess demand is going to be growing faster than agriculture maybe for a while. What it does for us, however, are two things. Because we can import that much, few people are going to be hungry. But also because of that big import gap, our agriculture has a space to grow into if it can sustain its competitive advantage. And good for seeing also what you have there in the report in terms of competitive advantage across several commodities, but how do you expand it? How do you deepen it? How do you diversify in terms of your competitive advantage? And that scope has to do with things like fertilizer, which also you have a good chapter on here in the report. So all in all, again, a really outstanding report. So congratulations to the editors and the authors and everybody who participated in this.
Let me offer some reflections on the AATM itself and why we value the partnership with Academia 2063 so deeply. The purpose of the AATM is straightforward but important. Each year, it provides a consistent, data-driven picture of Africa's agricultural trade performance, combining rigorous statistics on one hand with policy-relevant analysis on the other. This combination is really critical. Over time, it has become a trusted reference for policymakers, for researchers, for development partners, and even for the private sector seeking to understand trends, challenges, and opportunities in Africa's agricultural markets. For policymakers and stakeholders, the value of the AATM lies in its ability to ground decisions in evidence. The report offers updated data to support policymaking, investment planning, and capacity building. And this is what we at IFPRI are all about. And so we really value that aspect of it. And it helps governments and businesses assess how regulations, trade agreements, and market conditions shape incentives and outcomes across African value chains. The report monitors how African countries participate in world markets, where competitiveness is growing or eroding, and how regional integration efforts are progressing across and within regional economic communities. In doing so, it provides a critical evidence base for continental initiatives such as CAADP and, of course, the African Continental Free Trade Area. This 8th edition of the AATM focuses on the linkages between trade and food security, a topic of growing urgency in the current global context, and one that we anticipate will continue to be vital in the period to come. It examines how Africa's global and regional trade patterns interact with food availability, affordability, and vulnerability to shocks. The report gives particular attention to two strategically important areas of African food systems, as Usman just said. First, the rice value chain, given its growing importance for consumption on one hand, and then linked to that, of course, import dependence. And second, fertilizer trade as a key input shaping agricultural productivity and resilience. In addition, this particular edition takes stock of how the African Continental Free Trade Area is beginning to reshape trade relationships within and across regional economic communities.
Currently, Africa is importing over 100 billion USD worth of food annually. And at the same time, we know that these imports can be substituted by producing the same commodity on the continent, despite known challenges such as climate change and other environment-related issues, such as land degradation, floods, and droughts. Holding that tension on one hand, we know on the other hand that Africa has a comparative advantage in terms of availability of arable land, fresh lakes and rivers, with untapped potential to irrigate, favorable climatic conditions that make actually multiple cropping seasons for a number of African countries. And we all know that Africa is the youthful, vibrant, and progressively trained workforce that are ready to engage in various nodes of the agriculture value chains. When we do a horizon scanning across the globe, we know the agri-food industry is a $7 trillion kind of market, but Africa is still the lowest trader when you compare with other continents. Tariffs and non-tariff barriers remain a challenge, and productivity by hectares remain below global average in many parts of the continents. These are what AGRA and other partners we are working on to create a new era of food system transformation. And there is hope as we look forward. As we put our efforts together to help our continent, there is an emerging positive trend. For example, between 2003 and 2023, intra-African trade tripled. And we are seeing more and more regional market representing a reliable source of foods amidst even global supply chain disruption, such as COVID-19 pandemic or Russia-Ukraine conflict. So at AGRA, the more we zero down on this regional food basket, this regional market, we are quickly realizing that even though they are unevenly distributed, for example, the southern part of Africa is really leading on cereal, and then the northern part of Africa is leading on fish, fruits, vegetables, and you're seeing the East and West Africa remaining net importers and the persistent deficits. But this reality makes it critical to even justify why we need to work together to ensure that agreed trade framework, such as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, works in order to facilitate movement of goods from area of surplus to area of deficits. And under CAADP 10-year strategy, we see the need to sustain momentum in streamlining custom procedures, non-tariff barriers, and addressing structural production gaps.
As we already heard, trade is key for economic growth, but it is also a very political endeavor to move it forward. And therefore, it's great that this edition of the Trade Monitor highlights a key truth, and that is regional trade. It's not just economics, it's the backbone of food security and resilience, especially in the face of global crisis. Therefore, interesting to see that food and agriculture is a driver for intra-African trade, and that is important. That is an important takeaway for us as a global partner. We need pathways in addition and beyond ODA to build resilient food systems and strengthen global cooperation. And of course, for Germany, trade, and for Europe, trade is extremely important, and we are promoters of free trade in the world. But the free trade is under pressure. But this is, I think, a great motivation to also shift the policy choices towards a more positive and pro trade agenda. But there are warning signs remaining. Africa's agriculture imports, as we heard from outside the continent, are nearly 5 times the value of its intra-African trade. And this dependency is increasing, and it creates also vulnerability to external shocks rooted in structural and historical factors. The report is clear: without stronger regional production and trade system, Africa will stay exposed to global disruptions. If regional trade is more resilient than global trade, it deserves political prioritization. The AFCFTA provides the framework. Regional markets needs to be more attractive and competitive by reducing non-tariff barriers, simplifying and digitalizing custom procedures, harmonizing standards across regions, and increasing transparency, for example, through the trade monitoring dashboard. So I think what is really important is that some parts in trade negotiations are highly political, but some like standards and others can be also dealt on a more or less working level. And I think this is also important to take forward to make trade easier by reducing non-tariff barriers. This is one of the key elements, and this is why we are supporting the AFCFTA negotiations implementation as Germany, and this is why we set up the ECOWAS Agriculture Trade Program to improve the conditions for regional agricultural trade in West Africa.
They start looking at the proliferation of regional trade agreement with Africa, that is within Africa and with African countries. This is the market share of the leading intra-African traders. In fact, there are not many across different product categories. We see that usually we have South Africa and 9 other countries, but usually South Africa leading the exports of those commodity groups. And in terms of imports, we also have only 13 countries that are leading the imports intra-Africa. So here again, we see a side effect. It seems that trading within Africa is dominated by the largest economies. So we can see that we need to work more on the production capacities of least developed countries. We see 7 of them here. So here we try to show the interdependence between African regions in terms of intra-African trade. And you will see that Southern Africa has always been a trade surplus region with net exports. And North Africa has also been a net deficit country, a trade deficit countries, but since 2015, the region is emerging as a trade surplus within Africa. Let me clarify that being a trade deficit country is not a weakness, because some countries need to have a trade deficit for others to be able to export their surplus. So these graphs show that within Africa, regions are complementary to each other, and by expanding this relationship, it is possible to cover more food deficit that more of the food deficit that we usually take from outside Africa.
Yes, so let's start with fertilizer. Why fertilizers? We all know that there is a productivity issue in Africa. There is a consensus among researchers, analysts, policymakers, right? If you look at all the continental initiatives, CADEF, etc., this issue is present there. So we have an issue with productivity. If you look at for cereals, the yields are only at 40% of the world average, so pretty low. And you know that with fertilizer, we can increase productivity. They are crucial for delivering all the essential nutrients to crops, to soils. So we can boost ag productivity in Africa, and we think that we can enhance food security with that, because with higher crop yields, we expect higher productions, which will increase availability and also affordability, because we know that agri-food products are in general demand inelastic, not all products, but in general they are demand inelastic, meaning that even with a little supply shock, you can have a huge impact on prices. So that's why it is important. Also, with higher crop yields in the same land area, so you reduce the need you have to expand agricultural land. So you prevent deforestation and then environmental degradation. It's very low. The average is 23 kg per hectare. And you can see that the world average is 139, so very low. And if you look at the right panel, only 7 countries in Africa reached the 50 kg target set by the African Union, and these countries are Egypt, Mauritius, South Africa, Eswatini, Zambia, Botswana, and Seychelles. 2 key messages: highly concentrated, as you can see. The top 3 countries realize 87% of total production. If we were working on a market, if we were to compute the concentration index, the refinery index equivalent to that market, we will find 3200s. That's pretty high. If you look at the threshold set by the, for instance, the antitrust division of DOJ in the US to define markets that are highly concentrated, this is twice the threshold of a DOJ. So it's a very high level of concentration. And the rank of these countries in terms of production is mainly based on their endowment in natural resources, phosphate rocks. You can think of countries like Morocco, oil and natural gas. You can think of Nigeria, for instance.
I will take advantage of my position here also to thank academia and IFPRI, because I'm from IFDC. For those who don't know, IFDC is the International Fertilizer Development Center. We recently signed an MOU with academia, with who we're starting to have good work, and this is the opportunity to raise this point before going per se, in the panel.
Given that this year we focus on food security, I think when it comes to the recent developments and recent trends in trade and agriculture in Africa, I want to classify this in 2 main points. The recent trends in terms of the goods themselves and the recent trends in terms of the goods. For the recent trends in terms of the goods, I think especially when it comes to trade between Africa and the global economy in general, not necessarily intra-African trade, 2 important developments can be noticed. The first one is the increasing dependency of Africa in terms of basic foods, basic products, let's say, like cereals, which increases the vulnerability of Africa, given its the high price volatility of cereals at the international level. So that's a first important development that will clearly increase the vulnerability of African food security.
Nous parlons de plus de 100 milliards de dollars de surplus d'importation actuellement. Nous parlons d'une insuffisance des productions internes au niveau national. Nous parlons de 5 à 10% de même réduction des rendements agricoles au niveau continental. Et nous parlons aussi en même temps de problèmes énergétiques, parce qu'il y a seulement 43% des pays qui ont accès, donc capacité d'accès à l'énergie, et que vous savez que l'énergie est un pilier, est un déterminant dans l'agriculture en termes de transformation, de conservation, de conduite, etc. etc. Donc l'avantage comparatif, comme vous le dites, c'est bien, c'est logique. La spécialisation davantage, mais nous sommes confrontés à ces problématiques que nous devons régler au niveau africain, que nous devons vraiment affronter sur le plan politique, sur le plan institutionnel, sur le plan technique, et ce n'est pas facile, mais nous devons nous y faire pour que l'Afrique puisse vraiment arriver à une sécurité alimentaire et importer mieux et exporter entre pays, au niveau des REX et même au niveau entre REX.
But it's important, I think, not to forget that food security also means access to food, both economic and physical, stability. Food needs to be accessible and available at all times to all people, and also the utilization dimension. As many speakers have pointed out today, and as the AATM also shows, many African countries and many LDCs are net food importing countries, so that is important to bear in mind. We know that export restrictions on foodstuffs in other world regions can also worsen price spikes for food when they do occur, and that can affect African consumers. But as the report points out, it is also the case that trade barriers within Africa can also affect the functioning of markets, again, as the AATM clearly shows. I guess it's worth mentioning in this connection productivity. Current WTO rules allow governments to take quite a lot of different steps to boost productivity sustainably without distorting trade and markets, so that's also important. But we do know at the same time that distortions persist on global agricultural markets, including for products such as cotton, which African countries have really time and again highlighted, both at the WTO and in other fora. And called for action to address that particular challenge. Looking at the trade policy environment today, the market environment, it's clear that there are these trade tensions in fact which spill beyond the trade area and relate to other questions, and those have led to new trade barriers, including barriers which affect markets for food and agriculture in Africa. But there I would say it's important not to lose sight of the fact that 72% of global trade is still conducted on WTO terms on a non-discriminatory basis in line with MFN rules. The big thing that at the WTO we're focusing on at the moment is the upcoming ministerial conference, the 14th ministerial conference of the WTO in Cameroon this March 2026, which will be an opportunity for WTO members to chart a way forward.
Harmonizing digital systems is going to be very critical in reducing border wait times. And luckily, again, this is addressed in the AfCFTA. If we look at the annex on customs cooperation and mutual administrative assistance and Annex 4 on trade facilitation, we see various provisions which speak to this issue. But again, we are cognizant of the fact that whenever you mention data sharing, data sharing, especially in digital systems, it's a very sensitive issue amongst countries. But at the same time, within the continent, we have various instruments which provide guidance on data sharing. For instance, we have the Malabo Convention, and more recently, we have the AfCFTA protocol on digital trade, which actually has a very comprehensive chapter and annex on data governance, including cross-border data flows. So as I conclude, what I will say is that implementation of the AfCFTA agreement and its protocols is the continent's sure bet to promoting harmonization.
The major factor here is, the cost of fertilizers, access to fertilizers. And your question as to what does AGRA do in terms of working with stakeholders to improve this area. So our approach in countries is via a consortia model, where we bring together all actors in a market system to enable a functioning agriculture development agenda. And the reason why we bring all actors is because we believe that for agriculture to actually, develop from whichever level, local, country, or regional, a market has to be very functional. And we've heard from a number of speakers around this. So we bring in private sector who are going to give a signal of, what the market for a particular commodity is. And that allows us to identify, what are the priority value chains that we need to support. The market will define that, and the presence of agro-processors or traders will define, what they need. And in that same vein, we also then determine what are the sort of inputs that are required, including, fertilizers, seeds, maybe trainings, extension, and other things. So we bring all of these partners and actors in one, place and interrogate what are the challenges facing the, different value chains in different areas, and then co-create with them solutions as to how we address this.
Say thank you to our partners here, to BMZ, actually, for providing support for the AATM and for the long-term partnership. And thank you again to IFPRI, Fusenu, and Were and your colleagues for this very important, productive partnership we have with you, for the initiating or emerging partnership with AGRA, Let me also use this moment to thank our colleagues from UNECA, from WTO for being here with us. Another congratulations to the editors for the great job that you guys are doing. Thank you for keeping this publication at the level of where it is of quality and regularity. Thank you to your authors that you've gotten to do another nice piece this year. But we appreciate your time and your contribution to this event. Thank you, everybody, and looking forward to welcoming you to next year's AATM, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Back to you.